three-time presidential hopeful, Dr. Ron Paul. Welcome to the program. Great to have you back with us once again. So, Dr. Paul, the decision to strike the Syrian airbase was sudden, with the administration stating previously it wants to stay out of the civil war. Does Donald Trump really have a foreign policy strategy he's sticking to, or is he acting on a whim?
Well, I think it's changing all the time. We've been trying to figure it out. We're very interested in it. And he talked a lot about foreign policy, and the libertarian group that I represent to a degree, we were pleased that he wanted to have better relationship with Russia. And so we were a bit disappointed, and all of a sudden it changed. And matter of fact, we've been sort of scratching our head right now trying to figure out exactly what precipitated this change, because obviously it is different. And it's significant, and we don't know exactly what that means, but hopefully that we can still have better relationships with Russia as he intended during the campaign.
But what happened, though? Do you think Trump was pressured to act by more hawkish voices in the establishment, or was it a personal decision? I mean, is Trump making these dangerous decisions on his own?
Well, see, that's what I don't think anybody's figured out, because it's back and forth. It changes a whole lot. I don't think he comes from a firm set of principles. Neocons, we know exactly where they're coming from and what they want, and they're, in a way, predictable. Libertarians like myself, they're very predictable, because we think the least military confrontation, the better. We want to deal with the world and trade with everybody that we can and be open. But I don't think Trump adheres to that. I think he even admits that he doesn't have a rigid policy. But still, it doesn't explain the sudden shift, because he had some people in his administration that were sympathetic to his views, that they would be more open and friendly with Russia. Then all of a sudden it changed. But then again, there are a few in the administration that have exactly the opposite viewpoint. There were some neocons appointed to the administration, and their position, unfortunately, has been heard. And I think that the neoconservatives have a great deal of influence in the administration. So we don't know exactly what will come out of this, but those of us who would like to see non-confrontation, we're a bit concerned about it.
So Secretary Tillerson paid a visit to Moscow representing the Western stance on Syria, but can that message even be united and clear if Tillerson himself changes his mind week to week?
No, I think that is true, and I think we wonder who actually has the greatest amount of influence. I know there's organizations that represent certain viewpoints, and frequently mentioned in those groups that might have influence on foreign policy. They represent our military-industrial complex, and unfortunately, history has shown that people take advantage of conflicts and wars because there's war profiteering. Sometimes it's not intended to create war, but just a sense of war and conflict to make an excuse to build more and more weapons. And that may have a big influence because the industries are represented in governments. But this is something that's been known throughout history, that there's a incentive to have antagonism because it serves the interests of special groups.
So as you're saying, the motivation behind the attack is propping up military-industrial complex. What's firing 59 missiles going to do for the U.S. defense industry? Or do you think a bigger attack is being planned now?
Well, when you shoot off 50 Tomahawks, they have to be replaced, and they're going to be replaced, and maybe more, and they're going to cost more than the ones that were just recently shot. And that was, to me, a demonstration of a changed attitude, not so much to kill a lot of people. I don't think it was intended to do that at all, but it was supposed to be sending a message that Trump had a different opinion now about, Assad. Before, it was quite a bit different. He spoke out clearly on...
Do you think the U.S. is preparing an all-out intervention in Syria using a weapons of mass destruction as a pretext, just like it did in 2003 with Iraq?
Well, let's hope not. It's hard to judge that. And I say, I don't think Trump has a precise position, and it changes depending on which advisor he might have talked to recently. So let's hope it's not being prepared like that. But the distortion of the information that they deal with is a big concern. And my main goal with my organization and with my website is to just get to the truth of this, to the bottom of this, and with always a goal of less confrontation. And right now, it's a real challenge to figure out exactly what's going on. So I think that it's a serious problem.
So there's still no solid evidence, but the blame for the chemical attack is being pinned on Assad. U.S. envoy to the United Nations said that the proof is naturally classified. I mean, the same thing we heard when it came to Russia's meddling in the U.S. election. So is this like an established tactic now to talk about classified information and never reveal anything?
Yeah, I think sometimes you could look at the incident and dealing with the poison gases as more or less the excuse, not a good reason. It's an excuse to shift policy to satisfy some special interests. And, of course, the propaganda, war propaganda tends to be mostly lies, which is a historical thing. And there were a lot of lies told. I was in the Congress at the time about going into Iraq, which I strongly opposed, but there was all this story about the great danger. Saddam Hussein was about to bomb American cities, and he had weapons of mass destruction. So it is extreme exaggerations. And I think the answer is and the question is, why go so fast? If there's a question, let's sort it out. Let's find out what really happened. Was there really some gas there, and how did it happen, and who was holding those gas? And it just doesn't make any sense to me that Assad would be involved. It doesn't serve his interest. Whoever did this is a perfect false flag for changing our foreign policy, and that I think should be an investigation by our government, our people, and our politicians to find out the truth of things, rather than just accepting a hearsay about who did what. I think that's our biggest job that we have to deal with here.
So Eric Trump, the president's son, said that the airstrike on Syria proves his dad has no ties to Russia. I mean, could it really have been all about that, Trump bombing Syria to prove to the audience at home that he's not a Russian puppet?
Well, I think that's a possibility, but it's conjecture. But it would make sense if you don't have a firm policy and you can go back and forth. And he's getting hit politically. It looks like the pro-war people in this country have the control of the propaganda machine, and he might have felt like he was, not in charge as much and had to change his position. So what Eric is saying. Maybe has some truth to it. So now he didn't purposely go out and, shoot down a Russian plane or kill anybody. I think they went out of their way to warn Russia what he was doing. And the missiles were just symbolic. And it could be a political symbol, which is done a lot of times. Or it could be something more involved, but there's no way for me to know that.
Now, the alt-right movement that was so excited about Trump when he ran for office is not at all excited about the Syrian strikes. Figures like conservative commentator Ann Coulter are voicing their disappointment. Why is Trump going against his power base?
Well, I guess he's the only one that can answer that. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But if you don't have firm convictions, you can say, well, I have their support. They're going to stick with me. And sometimes what happens so often in elections is they will go to their base, the ones who are most determined, and they win the primary. And then they shift gears to a more moderate, modest position, maybe internationalist if they had been non-internationalist, in the primary. But in this case, maybe it's just he's a little bit late for doing that. And some of them are offended. I think it's a healthy challenge here in America when conservatives who had supported him and had hopes for him, there were even some libertarians had hopes that we would have a change in foreign policy. But I think a lot of people are waking up and saying, it looks like more of the same.
How the president has declared this kind of war with the media ever since his inauguration. But after he ordered the attack on Syria, there has been nothing but praise for him in the press. Why does the American president have to launch an attack on a foreign state to raise his approval rating? This is crazy.
Yeah, and that shows you that neoconservatives have powerful influence. And I think average people, I am determined with my experience in politics, average people don't like war. But they have to be, the war drums have to be beaten and in order to excite people. And yet it really doesn't make any sense. So, but the war propaganda is controlled by governments, as is tradition, and the media, and they have a lot of reasons for that. Everything from religious reasons to monetary reasons to military-industrial conflict, and all these things. But it is amazing how much influence they have. But I really don't think they represent the people. I still talk to our campus people, the young people, and the people I talk to, at least. They don't want this. They don't need confrontation, and it almost seems like it makes no sense whatsoever. And I think they might do this for reasons. It's token. It's not going to be a big deal. We're not declaring war on anybody. But the big problem is that sometimes accidents happen. There's unintended consequences, and you can't always predict what the opposition is going to do, and that's why I think it's so dangerous.
All right, Dr. Paul, we're going to take a short break right now. When we're back, we'll continue talking to Dr. Ron Paul, a veteran American politician, chairman of the Ron Paul Institute, discussing Washington's latest action in Syria and how it's affecting U.S.-Russia relations. Stay tuned. And we're back with Dr. Ron Paul, veteran U.S. congressman, a person with a huge experience in politics, discussing increased American military involvement overseas and its ramifications for the relations between Moscow and Washington. So, many hoped Trump's America First policy would mean a step away from America's overseas military interventions. And instead, he's increasing drone strikes, campaigns in Syria and Iraq. What happened to his campaign promise? Why is he not able to reduce U.S. military involvement in the world, like he said he would?
Well, I don't think anybody knows that other than he himself. We have to realize that he has just adapted to the continuation of the policy that Obama was doing. So it's been going on for a long time. It was Obama that said Assad had to go. Assad had to go. So now we're back to not quite that far yet. It looks like that may be his position, because the day after the missiles flew, he was saying something, well, we got to get along, get along. So it was, and the ambivalence is such that nobody can say exactly what the policy is. And I don't think ambivalence is a good idea. I think people should speak clearly. And that's one thing that we as libertarians do. We speak very clearly on what we think how we should treat other people in the world. But I think that this shifting back and forth leaves too many questions asked, and trying to please both sides, both the people who say, be friends and trade and have no problems, versus the people who say, well, we can't be resting until we get rid of Assad. And unfortunately, there's a lot of that talk, but that's been going on, for decades, actually. And we were hoping it would stop. You
have a point there. So while at first Trump was skeptical about regime change, now he's talking about removing Assad. But what do you think? Does the administration really have an idea about what to do in Syria if Assad goes?
Well, they're all planners, and they have all strategic plans. And it's hard for someone like myself deciding a good plan versus a less good or a bad plan, because we want to stay out of planning things for other people. So maybe the oil pipeline is a big deal, and a big deal for the allies of some of our people in the Persian Gulf, and a big deal for Russia. And where's this pipeline going to go? Is it going to go through Syria? That can be a big deal. But from my viewpoint, I would say let somebody else worry about it. We can worry about having a healthy economy and showing the people what it's like to live in a free society. That's what I would concentrate on. But I think there's this whole idea of the many things that go on, and people can be convinced, and also the political desire to please different factions. And when you do that, you usually don't please either side. Both sides get annoyed with you if you try to please both factions in a debate.
Because, in his recent interview to ABC News, Tillerson talked about the chaotic situation in Libya caused by violent regime change. So if he's aware of these consequences of regime change, does that mean he just doesn't care about what happens to Syria after toppling Assad?
There's no way for me to know exactly what's in his mind. I know his position seems to have shifted, but, it's not unique to the current administration, because by the time Obama was leaving office, he wasn't taking a position. Assad had to go. It was a softened position because he knew it wasn't going to happen, and he was going to leave it for somebody else. So I don't think I can, I try to sort it out, and I try to influence our foreign policy in a way that I like to see it go, but I can't, look into their minds on what they're really thinking about because, like I said earlier, there's a lot of ambivalence about, what might be going on in these people's mind, and a lot of different special interests and how far and how fast you have to go. It's so much easier for us who believe in non-interventionism and minding our own business and not maintaining an empire. That's simple. And I believe it's the right thing to do. But when they get into intervention and management, it's sort of like managing an economy. Nobody can manage an economy. Only the people can do that. Same way on foreign policy.
So I'm going to ask you these questions, and I just want your assessment of what we have in the finish line. So U.S. is helping in the struggle against ISIS in Iraq's Mosul and in neighboring Syria as well. But according to reports from the ground, the American attack on the Syrian government only paved way for an ISIS offensive in the area. So does this mean the administration is helping terrorist groups? And if so, then they don't care about it?
Or they're not very smart. Maybe they don't understand it. And there's a bit of that goes on. One of the rationales about how we got into that mess in the Middle East is we really, our government didn't understand, the players over there and didn't understand the issues. That may be part of it, but I think that happens to be true. That this did help the rebels, but it's known, it's been in the papers that we have allied ourselves with the moderate rebels, and of course some of our American politicians went over and said there aren't any moderates in Syria, but we use them because the American people don't want to see body bags coming back, so they'll use troops that might go over and say, well, we'll help one of these radical groups. And they're going to destroy, Assad. I mean, this was more or less the rationale for us helping people to deal with the Soviets when they were in Afghanistan. We helped radicalize, some of the Islamists to fight our battle for us, and I think that's part of the story too.
So in that interview to ABC, Rex Tillerson explained Russia's support for Assad is either down to Moscow's incompetence or the fact that it has been outmaneuvered by the Syrians. How can you negotiate and defuse the situation if you consider your partners incompetent? I mean, can you really go anywhere from here?
It's a tactical thing for a lot of people. Well, you do this, you don't do this, you intervene here and move around. And so to me, it's if they're dealing with a problem that can't be that solved. It's sort of like when we talk about monetary policy, what is the right interest rate? Well, for me, it's the free market. But they tinker around, well, raise it a little, lower it a little, and tactical things don't work for me. I want strategic things. I want to know what we stand for. We stand for freedom. We stand for non-intervention, free markets. We stand for non-interventionist foreign policy and not antagonize people. We stand for a free trade. So at times we hear words like that and sometimes not, whichever serves their purpose at that particular moment.
So at the G7 summit, there has been no unity among the Western countries on Russia and Syria. Despite support for the U.S. missile attack, the UK's idea to impose new sanctions on Russia over its support for Assad was not welcomed by everyone. Does this mean Europe is not ready for any kind of tough response?
Well, let's hope so. I mean, I don't see how it serves any purpose. Unless some people behind the scenes want it for some sinister, selfish purpose, and they have to convince the people that they either out of fear have to go along with the policy or out of a sense of so-called patriotism, something like that. So there's a lot of reasons behind the scenes, which are the real reasons. Then you have to have the people who use the propaganda, and usually patriotism is one of the things that they appeal to. I was always accused in Washington when I wouldn't vote for the funding for these programs that I was not a true American. I was not supporting America, and I wasn't for the troops. But I didn't feel that lonely when I talked to young people and the taxpayers, because a lot of people agree with me that we shouldn't be doing this. But then again, there's a lot of people who agree with this more militant approach, because it's people like to be strong and they don't want to be pushed around. So it's a challenge on propaganda.
Talking about the U.S. taxpayers, during that same meeting, G7 meeting, Rex Tillerson left European diplomats puzzled with one remark, asking, quote, "Why should U.S. taxpayers care about Ukraine?" What do you think? Is there an answer to that question?
Well, they should care if we're wasting taxpayers' money to have regime change and take one leader out and put another one in. They should care about it because there's a tax cost, but then there's also a cost on what does it do with relationships. So, yes, that's very, very serious. But the American people, seem to be convinced that spending more money on military is always okay. Conservatives who are supposed to be saving money would never save a nickel, when it comes to, military spending. And that to me is sad, because they're inconsistent about being fiscal conservatives.
Generally speaking, this foreign policy approach of using force, it seems to be favored on both sides of the political establishment in America, with Republicans and Democrats alike coming across as hawkish. Why is there no room for a conciliatory approach in the U.S. politics anymore?
Well, there was. That's why that helped Donald Trump become president. So the question isn't that they're not there. It's that, once again, the policy shifted, after the fact, because the grassroots were mobilized with that, and they would like to see that. And I think that is very good. But once again, they're expressing some disappointment here, but we don't know what the final conclusion is. Maybe this was just a demonstration rather than a total change in foreign policy.
All right. Thank you very much for this interesting insight. We were talking to Dr. Ron Paul, longtime congressman, a U.S. political icon, and we've been discussing the latest developments in U.S.-Russia relations, the surprising turns of the Trump administration's policies, and Washington's engagement in the Syrian conflict.